Well, hello and welcome to Outdoor Oklahoma. I'm Todd Craighead. Today I'm at Lake Arcadia on one of the many areas that the Wildlife Department actually owns and manages. Recently, this area has been receiving a lot of attention to help manage and manipulate the habitat for wildlife. Although unlike Arcadia, the vast majority of Oklahoma is privately owned. That's why the Wildlife Department depends so heavily on private landowners to help manage Oklahoma's wildlife habitats. And for those people that go above and beyond to manage their personal private property for wildlife, we like to recognize in our Landowner of the Year program. And recently we caught up with this year's Landowner of the Year as he helped to manipulate quail habitat at the field trial grounds in Ardmore. This area is a little known jewel in Oklahoma's crown, and most of the American Kennel Club's registered hunting breeds hold their field trials on these grounds. So we headed down to Ardmore to take a look at the finals for the Weimaraner field trials and talk with this year's Landowner of the Year, Chris Kalbeck, and find out why managing for quail is so important for this sporting event.
In the before shot area that we looked at today, in the foreground you saw some dead trees that were from a prior burn years ago. There are some eastern red cedars that have popped up in the foreground, and along the edges a lot of the elms have grown in, and to the extent that it's difficult to actually see the depth of them until you get into the middle of them. But what we're doing today is thinning that pasture out so it'll be prepared to burn in the spring. In general, people should be concerned about quail habitat. There's Grant Huggins also had another wonderful little saying, there ain't nobody don't like quail. It's a wonderful bird. It has a very distinct need for 5 different kinds of cover, and it must have all of them kind of contiguous.
Species like little blue stem are very important for their nesting success. They'll nest in other things, but that's from ODWC research has shown that they prefer that, especially in the western part of the state. Forbs are just what is essential for almost all wildlife species, and they rely heavily on those for their food supply.
If you can manage for quail, many of the other things are managed in the process and benefit many of the other focuses. And so to the extent that quail habitat can be done, prescribed burning is one of the most valuable tools, and people need to not be as scared of prescribed fire. If it's done correctly, it is done in a very managed environment and a prescription specifically, and very rarely does a prescribed fire get out of hand.
Beverly. River, brace 1. Izzy, brace 3.
This is where we have our national championships every year. The Weimaraner Club of America holds their national field championships here every year, and we have since the 70s.
What if the bird's running and we can't get it to fly?
So a good dog knows the difference between what's called a pen-raised bird, a quail raised in captivity, and a wild bird. And they react differently. Like we come in with 500 birds, 500 quail for our field trial, and they'll be gone. So everybody who comes in for field trials, like our little field trial, puts out 200 birds. And a week later is when our national championship starts. Get it! And there's no birds. We have to put birds out again. So this will be wonderful if we can start inducing the quail to stay around and naturalize and go wild. So you get a much better, more intense point, more drive off a wild bird than you do a pen-raised bird. We love these grounds. They're wonderful. They're tough grounds for dogs, but for a championship, that's what you'd like to have.
National Open champion, Sasha!
Now, in the area where we had done previous tree thinning, down south of where the field trial clubhouse is, that area has a variety of different grasses in it already. It has very small populations of Chickasaw plums, sand plums, and it has greenbrier and some little dogwood thickets, and those are all very good for quail. When we remove the trees, those have a chance to flourish back, and the grasses hopefully have grown. They'll have a little bit of chance to get some stand on them, so we'll have a more improved burn for the spring. We would like to get the message out to the public in general, the different partners that are out there that can team up with Quail Unlimited as a charitable organization. We are applying for different grants in different sectors to try to team up with anybody that has an interest in habitat work. We want to focus on hands on the equipment, feet on the ground to get our birds in the air. And to that extent, by getting the message out through Oklahoma Wildlife Department, through the Natural NRCS, what our hopes are is to find different funding sources, because it is very labor intensive and very costly capital-wise for the equipment necessary to do these tasks. Once the trees are thinned, it will be more of an annual practice of prescribed burning, which is less capital intense but is very volunteer oriented. So by getting the message out, by getting the educational value of this heightened, we hope to, in our Arbuckle Mountain area, at a minimum, get the message out on what habitat management can do, and hopefully the individuals will take that back to their properties, whether they're 20 acres, 10 acres, 100 or 5,000 acres, they'll be able to use these same practices there.
You know, Chris is right. Usually what's good for one wildlife species is good for many others as well. And one way that we find out how a species is doing is simply by counting them and getting a visual sense of their overall health. Well, recently, Damon Springer and his crew worked late in the evening out here at Arcadia to see how the bat population was doing. Let's see what they found out.